Well, hello there. Who are you?
This is the Zodiac speaking.
Killing must feel good to God, too. He does it all the time. And are we not created in his image?
We all go a little mad sometimes.
After all, murder is, or should be, an art.
I could kill you now pretty easily. Do some interesting things before anyone showed up.
What are these films you can't wait to look at?
Welcome to the Final Girls podcast and the 24th episode of our series dedicated to on-screen serial killers of horror film and TV history. I'm your podcast host, Anna Bogutske, and this week we're gonna finally have a bit of a laugh. After a couple of very heavy episodes, we're doing serial killers right, with two black comedies featuring serial killing mothers. First up, there's John Waters' iconic serial mom, starring Kathleen Turner as a suburban housewife obsessed with the most famous serial murderers, who starts killing people who upset her by, say, not recycling properly. And then we also discuss Alice Lowe's Prevenge, a darkly funny slasher where a heavily pregnant woman, played by a heavily pregnant Lowe herself, goes on a revenge rampage after losing her partner in a climbing accident. Oh, and it's her unborn baby that's telling her to kill. Joining me for this hoot of an episode is film critic and podcast regular Leila Latif to talk about the joys of seeing Alice Lowe and Kathleen Turner murder people on screen. Let me know your favorite Beverly Sutphin singer by emailing me on hello@thefinalgirls. And if you enjoy this episode, this series, or this podcast, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also support us on Patreon at The Final Girls, and you can find me online on X and Instagram at Anna B. Demented. Be warned, my book about horror films and feelings called Feeding the Monster is out this week, and listeners get a special discount if you buy from the faber.co.uk website. You can find the code in the show notes. And with all that said, please enjoy our take on Prevenge and Serial Mom. We started talking about skincare. We might as well talk about the skincare that Kathleen Turner or Beverly would be using in Serial Mom. Do you think she's a BB cream kind of girl, or more of a high coverage foundation?
Which involves like a cold cream and night cream and morning cream, but I think the brands are very like old school. Like I think she might be using like Nivea's.
Oh, she's 100% a Nivea person. Yeah. God, it has that big round blue tub, you know, of cold cream, day and night, every day.
Yeah, I feel like there's steps and like never a morning or a night is skipped.
I mean, same. Very much same.
Do you love this? Like, this is like something that you should have on. It's just like kind of, you know, like almost one of the BuzzFeed things of just like your female serial killers and like what brand, like, what your brand of skincare says to you in terms of what the type of serial killer you would become.
Well, you should pitch it to BuzzFeed. I'm sure they're always on the market for listicle/quizzes/true crime content. I mean, we're starting off really nicely with skincare, and I'm going to transition us into serial killer movies because that's what we're here to talk about.
All the female interests.
It's murder and makeup, obviously. Leila, thanks so much for your time coming on again to talk about these two serial killer black comedies, I should say. Both of them feature serial killer mothers as their protagonists. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, before we get into both Prevenge and Serial Mom, what do you think of when you think of violent mothers in horror?
I think the first thing that or at least kind of one of the first things I ever wrote within like the field of film criticism was about Hereditary and like the evolution of like mothers in the field. Annoyingly, I now actually hate that piece when I look back on it.
I remember that piece.
I was mean about Shelley Duvall So I have so many regrets about it. I sort of drank the Stephen King Kool-Aid of believing Shining the film wasn't as good as The Shining the book. And, they're different beasts and they have their rationality. But one of the things he said was just like, oh, I'd never write a mother like that in horror. And I sort of took that to hand rather than like appreciating that like Shelley Duvall is doing absolutely like majestic work in this film. I'm always a big fan of violence and motherhood being next to one another in horror, because since I've become a mother, I am so much faster to violence or to like violent thought. And that sounds bad, but
I would like to more explanations, please.
I think motherhood and death are very, very closely tied. When
100%.
someone gives you a baby, you have this like sense of like, oh, okay, I have to stop this thing from dying. I also would die for this person. And it's like, there's a lot of like existential questions that come with it. But like, I think when people say like, oh, I would die for my child, like that sounds sort of like hyperbolic, but like, I mean that extremely practically. So I was in Amsterdam with my family the other week and I was walking down the street with my daughter holding hands, and a man, like he was holding like a bottle, like a plastic bag full of beers, and he swung it and it whacked into her, and she's 7. And like, I was so quick to violence. Like I didn't actually attack him, but like I went off in a way that like I simply wouldn't have been capable of beforehand. If somebody had whacked me with a bag, I would have been in shock, but I was straight into like, motherfucker, I will fucking kill you. How fucking dare you go there? And then like my husband, who had just been a few steps in front, comes around and he's just like, oh, okay, do I know like what's happened? He hadn't seen it. And it was just like, oh, do we need to like attack this man? And like, and we generally considered it. Like somebody hit our kid. Like, and that's not like really, like, we're not violent people, but it's just like there is a strange sort of like propensity to violence that I think comes when you like have children, and like it almost like in a very kind of like plain speaking way. So like I love it when those things are kind of shown side by side, and obviously I love Hereditary.
I'm particularly glad to have you on for this episode because I am not a mother. My only experience of motherhood is that of being a daughter. So I'm so excited to hear your thoughts on both of these films. And
I'm also so intrigued because you're an only child. That's right.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I always felt like that must be so weird because as an only child, there's like almost more pressure on you not to die. That's so dumb. Like, I'm one of 6. Like, they could leave, it's not, they'd be sad. But
you know what's particularly funny? As you said that, I just had a sudden flashback of all of the bizarre near-death experiences that I've had in my life, pretty much since I was a kid. Like, even I was born, what do you call it? Is it a breech baby where you're kind of upside down? Yeah. So I was born upside down with my umbilical cord tied around my neck. So that was already, like, even before I came out of the womb, I was already having near-death experiences.
Yeah, and also that would have been in some ways your mother's near-death experience, because like if that had happened in like 200 years ago, that she would have been a goner too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, these things are so tied together.
Totally. And then like I fell off a tree. And then I fell off a horse and broke my back. Like, there were so many instances of like me constantly being in really dangerous situations where actually, now that you mention it, I was like, oh my God, I must have been such a stressful child for my parents. I was constantly almost dying in one way or another.
And did you have that like pressure ever like put upon you at all? Like, did you ever feel like, oh, I must survive because for these people,
Actually, no. Now that you mention it, I think my particular pressure, and this is not a me therapy session, was related to other things. It was never kind of about survival. And I wonder it's because perhaps because of all of these like weird situations that I found myself in and survived, kind of miraculously so. I wonder if that kind of gave me a sense of invincibility where I was like, well, I broke this and now I'm fine. Or they told me I had a weird heart, but then I didn't. Or they told me I wouldn't walk again, but then I did. So I can get away with anything.
Nice. I love that. And you're such a I think you're such like a brave person, kind of like creatively in all the projects that you take on and stuff. I wonder if that kind of leads into it.
Maybe I'm just physically arrogant, where like even in the gym, you'd be like, oh yeah, for sure I can lift this. Definitely. Yeah, for sure. Will I actually injure myself? The likelihood is very high, but in my head, I think I can absolutely do anything.
Yet to be proven wrong.
Well, I've been proven wrong many times, but what about your relationship with these films? Kind of bringing it back a bit more to the two movies we're going to cover. When did you first watch these films? And I'm really curious to know whether your viewing of them has changed since you became a mother yourself.
So I think the Serial Mom I watched probably around the time that it came out, maybe a year or two afterwards. And all I really remembered for it before this rewatch today was you're not supposed to wear white before Labor Day.
Yes.
That really like stuck in my mind.
Yes.
And Prevenge, I believe I watched whilst I was pregnant. I was very into watching pregnancy horror whilst I was pregnant. So like, let's say, one of the things at pregnancies is when you get to 3 months and they see a heartbeat, that's generally the time where you can tell people and like it's safe because like the chances of this like going well are like high at that point. So I celebrated by watching Rosemary's Baby, and like that is like that's all. There's actually not a huge amount of like good stuff about pregnancy out there. So I was just kind of starved at the time because I was also like tired and just wanted to stay in bed and watch movies. Like trying to find anything that reflected my experience, and like Prevenge was just like such a joy. I loved it so much. Yeah, I kind of wish that my 3-month movie had been Prevenge rather than Rosemary's Baby. Though I loved Rosemary's Baby, but it was a rewatch, and I think this felt like such a special thing when I did actually see it. It was probably like 5 or 6 months along.
So this is incredible. I was going to start with Serial Mom, but let's go into Prevenge straight away, because I would love to hear what about it gave you so much joy, especially when you were watching it being pregnant yourself.
Well, I mean, it's the thing I think about being pregnant is a lot of the times people don't realize how like grisly it is. I mean, like my doctor came to me and she was just like, here's 100 pregnancy symptoms. You're probably going to get like 20 of them. And we don't know which 20 it's going to be. But like for me, it was extremely bloody. So one of the things, you have more blood in your system. So I was having constant nosebleeds. If I like nicked, like if I got a paper cut, it would like be like a gusher. My gums bled every single time that I brushed my teeth or flossed. And, you know, so it became this, like, there was something of a like malevolence to it where like I was getting like a sort of proximity to quite a, but like, a gore, I guess.
Like an everyday gore.
100%. But then there's this like weird disconnect. And it's a disconnect that I still feel all of the time, where I feel like I'm expected to be so wholesome and straightforward. And I feel like every mother that I meet, or at least a huge amount of them, are like my parents' friends, if that makes sense. Like I feel like everybody else is an adult in a way that I'm not, and I'm still like a bit messed up and sort of like prickly and have like complicated feelings. And it's like, so like, yeah, her sort of disconnection from it felt so honest, because it's like, it's almost like got a Stepford Wives, I guess, element to it, where it's like, yeah, people are treating you like you're this sort of robotic imbecile, and you're just like, I'm just as like complicated and edgy as I've always been. Yeah, I love this film. I think the pitch of humor is absolutely brilliant. It's just as funny as it is horrifying, and it just feels very, honest and insightful.
I wonder if that has something to do with the fact, and, you know, this was very heavily discussed when the film was released back in 2016, that Alice Lowe was heavily pregnant herself during the making of the film, which she pitched, and then kind of when it got greenlit, they were on a very real time pressure because of her pregnancy. And do you feel like, knowing that Ruth is not in a costume, that it's a real kind of pregnant woman, and there's many shots throughout the film that I really love where her pregnant belly is kind of taking up the majority of a shot. Did you find that it sort of affects your viewing of it, and especially when we see her go commit so much bloody murder?
Yeah, because I think there's so much of like the pregnant experience that all becomes about the belly, and like obviously that is like this huge strange alien thing that you have in you, but there's sort of like elements of like the way that she walks and the way that you kind of waddle side to side, and like a lot of the time the way your jaw feels a lot heavier because you've got all this blood in your system, and how you have, I mean, I'm not sure precisely which she looked for, but your hair's never looked better. And like Alice Lowe's,
her hair looks amazing.
Gorgeous, phenomenal head of hair. And I was just like, oh my God, I remember the pregnancy hair. Like, it was so thick and lustrous. Yeah, so like those like small details, I think it's like, because it's a whole body transformation rather than just, strapping on a prosthetic belly for most people.
Totally.
I love her. I'm so excited for her new film. Have you seen it?
I have not seen it yet, no.
Okay.
But there is also how, not just how she carries herself in the film, but also how people react to her, which goes back to what you were talking about earlier, both kind of in the scenes that lead up to murders. Like there's a scene with Gemma Whelan, I think, where she literally breaks into her house and she's threatening her with a knife, but she punches her in the stomach, and then it's the victim that's apologizing to this woman who's there to 1000% kill her. The guy that she hooks up with, who I cannot comprehend how, does not realize that she's pregnant until he literally sticks his hand up her dress. And it is this thing of like, she's made of a ceramic or something. Everybody suddenly switches gears completely in how they talk about her or how they talk to her. And it's there, I think, where the character Ruth finds the space to pounce at them, because they absolutely cannot, they don't feel like they can defend themselves against a pregnant woman.
Yeah, no, very true. I mean, I felt like at that time in my life, I was treated very much like both like a child and an imbecile. And as a result, what kind of happened with me was that I ended up just kind of like really retreating from the world. I was like, I didn't understand these people that were like going out and like having a great time. I was just like, I'm going to lie in bed and watch like American Horror Story for hours and hours at a time. Because it's actually such a disquieting experience to be treated as so other. That yeah, my instinct was just to retreat, but I completely understand why like Alice Lowe's is a performance is, of all the things that she's going through, she's hearing this like baby's voice, she's feeling suicide, she's going through grief, she's feeling homicidal, and she's going through grief, but like she's also just perplexed by the way that everyone's reacting to her. And I think that was often my default, where I was just like, I'm not being weird, you're being weird. Sure. I mean, I'm bleeding out of my nose a lot, but like other than that, like
other than that, still as cool and edgy as I was before I was pregnant.
Hell yeah! I got taught, but my greatest moment of probably my entire life so far. So my prenatal class, my teacher did say that I was the best dressed pregnant woman she'd ever seen. And I was just like, fuck yeah, still got it. Because you know what balances out a bump? A statement necklace.
So let's talk a little bit about Ruth then. Who is Ruth and why is she on a killing spree? So essentially Ruth, played by the writer and director Alice Lowe, is a woman who's like very heavily pregnant, and her, I want to say husband, I mean partner, but I think husband, has basically in a climbing incident, it was a case of like somebody had to be cut loose, and like the group that he was with made the like agonizing decision to sort of sacrifice him so they could all keep going. He is played by Kayvan Novak.
contender, I think, for the world's most handsome man. And she's sort of on this like revenge spree, and at first we kind of see it as being like something that she's just got this almost like demonic, malevolent presence. She's hearing the voice of her baby who is commanding her to kill. As the film goes on, we get more into sort of the motivations behind this, and the fact that she is coming from this place of like really grieving the husband that should be with her as this baby is born, and it's more revenge than just kind of like on a killing spree because the fetus wants her to.
Yeah, I mean, there's this really fun element of the fetus, her unborn child, talking to her and sort of commanding her to kill, or at least encouraging her to kill. But when I was rewatching this film this morning, I had sort of forgotten how sad she is. You know, this comes at a time where there was a lot of attention being placed on horror films made about or by women. So obviously this got a ton of attention, particularly because of the, you know, admittedly great story of the fact that Alice Lowe made it while she was pregnant herself. But Ruth is she's such a self-deluded character. And I say that as a compliment because I love a completely delulu, unreliable narrator. And I think the Prevenge is done completely from her point of view. But because her perspective is not to be trusted, like there's this scene that I had completely forgotten about before the rewatch where the guy who was the leader of the climbing expedition, the one who actually cut the cord to her husband or partner, he sort of mentions that they had been on the rocks, that the husband was thinking about leaving her. So I think there's something about how convinced she is of her righteous right to revenge that then comes into conflict with the real world, which makes it a much darker watch than I remember experiencing for the first time. Like, her perspective is not to be trusted, really. And I think Alice plays her in a way where she is completely convinced of her place in the world, of her relationship, of what she needs to do. And it makes for an unsettling second viewing, I reckon. Because the first viewing is, I remember being very entertained. It's hilarious. It's a really funny film in a really dark way. But then once you know where the jokes are and where they're going to land, I focus so much more on Ruth, and more than sad, I found her like really, very convincingly deluded. What did you think upon rewatch?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. It's such a cruel landscape that she's in. I mean, like, yeah, that moment where kind of there is this suggestion that like her marriage or partnership was flawed and like destined for failure, like that just makes it so much all the crueler. And I think the way that Alice Lowe plays it is so perfectly pitched, because you sort of see her receiving the information and not entirely deterred by it, but just like the tiniest like chink in the armor absorbing it, and like how devastating that is, because not only is she having to go through what she's going through, and you know, in theory a baby's compelling her to kill, but like also, like just like the even like the happy memories are gone, and there's no opportunity for a path forward. I mean, films take a long time to make, and you know that far better than I do, like what the process is. But like, it does feel like maybe Alice Lowe was pregnant for like many years, being able to like draw into the particular vulnerabilities, because I mean, the fact she did this whilst pregnant, but I'm sure she's developing it and like tapping into something long before seems like a kind of miraculous. I mean, like that is. It's so specific.
And I've always loved that she's often compared in interviews and etc. the film to, and the character of Ruth, to Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. And she sort of explained her reasons why, but I think upon watching it, the comparison that sticks out the more to me because of how convinced Ruth is of her own righteousness and being in the right. And, the end justify the means, and the end being avenging the memory of this man who may not have even loved her anymore.
Oh God, that's just so, it's, weird because obviously we are not people that are averse to like seeing a little cruelty on screen, but that is just like breathtakingly cruel.
It really is. We were talking about before how it is funny. It is kind of fairly darkly funny. How do you think it straddles comedy and horror?
I think that's a really difficult balance.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I feel like I'm a person that finds that even like the worst horror films I still get something out of, and I find very few things funny. And like often like there's like me on the side of like something that's like 12% Rotten Tomatoes. It's because I'm like the only person that found this one comedy funny, and then and vice versa. I think what Alice Lowe does that's so funny is that she's very much just an act. She's such a subtle actor when it comes to comedy, where it's like it, and lot of the time, like the punchlines that happen are just kind of like quite subtle facial expressions, which become very delicious. It's like and eminently rewatchable. I mean, like, yeah, there's kind of your zingers and there's like your fun lines and there's the absurdity, but actually, it's sort of the funniest moments for me are just watching the way her face reacts when like the midwife is talking or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And there's a few moments like the zingers are funny, but it's the deadpan moments that really get me. Because again, I think it's this complete commitment. And it's the same way I felt about Kathleen Turner and Serial Mom when we get to that film. It's the complete commitment to a very bizarre premise. It's like a heavily pregnant serial killer. How would she lure her victims in? How would she murder them? How would they react to it? And I think she fully commits to that bit. And it's in the scenes where she's almost taken aback, like shocked. It's like, what do you mean? I am a working mother.
And like these great things where I think so often, like in like, and I don't think this is just like a maternal thing, but I think that so often when it comes to being a woman trying to get any sort of healthcare, you're so placated, you're so told to like calm down, not overreact. It's not as serious as it is. I mean, like I could rant about this until the cows come home. And I feel like that feels like a more universally feminine experience of when you're sort of telling people that like something is drastically wrong and they're being like, it's very normal. A lot of people are this way. Like that frustration, I think, I haven't had a baby in like 6 years. And I was just like, yeah, that happened to me and the doctor's last week.
Wow. I mean, I do also feel, I don't know if you got the same way, that she sort of wants to keep this intense murderous relationship with her baby kind of private almost. Like there's a few moments where she tries to tell the midwife about what's happening, but in too oblique a term to even be fully understood. Like she's being very literal, and the midwife is just like, oh yeah, that is cute, isn't it? Yeah, it happens a lot. Don't worry. I kind of understood that as her just wanting to preserve whatever germ or remainder of her husband to herself, like not share it with anyone.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting read because I mean there's like something in some ways like nothing more intimate than sort of like growing something that's like a part of someone else within you. And that is like an enduring connection to her husband. And I think there is like a real sense of like as soon as she gives birth, she sort of loses that. Like there's something about having someone's like actual like literal DNA within you, and that's coming to an end. And in a way that's sort of like what I suppose what happens with so many like feelings of revenge, right? It's just like you do it and then what? And then like almost person's more dead than they ever were.
Yeah, and there's that really heartbreaking moment where she says, I would swap her, that's her baby, I would swap her to have him back. She's like fully ready to give up the child if it means having her husband back.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, I've got to say, she's not met the kid. As somebody that loves my children, I think it would be very weird if I was like, haven't met them, Andrew, off you go. We've been together for many happy years, but yeah, no. But like I guess that's like a transition of love where it's like at least the way that it ended, it's such a kind of cruel way that he was taken from her in particular that you do. I think there's some like elements of grief where it's just like humans aren't designed to recover from this. And when you're having a kid, you're sort of setting yourself up for the potential of another one. Because you've already gone through that. The idea of like then also like, oh, okay, now I'm going to build someone that is a representation of this person who I will never recover from the grief of losing. And also this is another person that can like make me like potentially lose all sense of self if anything ever were to happen to them. Like, I think it's a film about grief rather than wrapped up in a kind of very like jazzy premise. But what it says about grief, I think it's quite profound.
What do you think? What do you think is its main point then about grief? Because there's so many horror movies that sort of skirt along on the general theme of, oh, it's about grief, it's about trauma. But how do you think Prevenge tackles it?
I just feel like it's a film about vulnerability in like many ways, and whether that's in like falling in love with a man and then finding or having a baby, like about how that makes you like this raw, scarred kind of mess of a person going through the world. That's like open and wounded, and she becomes sort of almost more open to sort of these voices and these things because like the propensity for misery almost in her life has become so much more than it has. So yeah, I mean, like the talking baby element I think was really fun, and I think it's a really, really funny movie. But yeah, rewatching it, I was surprised, but I was just like, I think this actually says something really complicated about how vulnerable it is to transition into loving someone or something.
Before I move on to a more out-and-out comedy, I kind of want to talk about the scenes in between the murders. Ruth's interactions with the midwife, who's played by Jo Hartley, are kind of the more consistent relationship of hers that we're shown. It's the character that interacts with her several times throughout the film. How do you think Prevenge plays into, like you were alluding to before, the ways that people talk to or treat pregnant women?
Depressingly accurately. I don't know. It's such a weird thing, Anna, to like be treated like an imbecile. And I mean, there is like a certain context with me where I've kind of got the Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm thing of like, I'm a hypochondriac, so I'm basically a doctor. Like, I understand
yes,
medical things pretty well. And like, actually to be talked to in this sort of babyish way is actually like deeply unsettling. And you end up in this sort of like, or at least personally, where I was just like, yeah, no, I understand what colostrum is, I understand what amniotic fluid is. I've like read every fucking book on this. Like, well, what am I? So, but then to be like babied yourself. And then there's such a strange transition, which I think happens very like interesting in the film, where then you get handed the baby and it almost just pivots the way too much the other way, where it's just like you're treated like an imbecile and then you're treated like way too much of an expert, where you're just like, I'm sorry, like I can't just, what do you mean I'm in charge of this? No, person that told me that I needed to consider drinking water needs to like, not be like, best of luck to you, kid, with this whole new person. Good luck not traumatizing them. And like, obviously in Anna Slow's case, it maybe homicidal. But yeah, no, I think she kind of got all of those beats. I think it's because, am I right in thinking that the final scenes where she gets given the baby, that's her real baby?
That is a real baby, yeah. They did that after. So it's really cute. And I think it is still very, I mean, it's hidden quite well, but obviously most of the scenes in the film, even after she's supposed to have given birth, which I think she's still pregnant, but they've just hidden it a bit better. But it is her real daughter. It's adorable. And then, you know, she also brought her daughter on the Q&A tour in the film's release. So that baby, so many people met that baby. It's pretty cute.
Oh, that makes me so happy. I do love Alice, though.
She's wonderful.
This was before I was working this field at all, so I didn't get to... I was not part of that. But I would say, much like yourself and also Kayvan Novak, a supporter of Cinema for Gaza. And I will say, all of the people that are supporting Free Palestine are hot and talented.
That is a fact. That is an actual demonstrable fact. So, shall we move on to Serial Mom, which is another horror comedy starring a homicidal mother, but made 20 years before Prevenge, and sort of is also tackling some hard truths, mostly about American media and American families, that might not be as close to home as Prevenge, but it's definitely hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. It so holds up, doesn't it? It's so fucking funny. Yeah, I feel like I need to kind of start by just thanking you for bringing this movie back into my life.
You're very welcome. My God, is it absolutely demonically watchable and hilarious.
I don't understand how this is not a film that I've seen 40 times.
So when did you first watch Serial Mom, and where do you in general stand on the work of John Waters?
Love John Waters. I grew up in Sudan, as you well know, and so like we had kind of a slightly different relationship. Like we didn't really have cinemas, but like things would come onto cable, which was like an Africa-wide thing called Mnet, and things would not be. We didn't have like a watershed time, so you could kind of like watch quite adult things at like 4 p.m. because you just put on the movie channel and like that's what it was, because it was Africa-wide, so there wasn't necessarily like one time area. Sorry, how we should be explaining the business model of Mnet. So I first came to know and love John Waters because one of the things that was always on at about 6 p.m. was The Late Show with David Letterman, and they would often replay interviews with John Waters. So I loved him as a talk show guest for a long time.
As a pop culture figure.
And I remember he was so delightful. And one of the ones that always stuck with me is that he said he had all these nieces and nephews, and he would find the like most lethal toys, mostly down to choking hazards, that were like taken off the sales each year, and then find them and buy them for all of his nieces and nephews. But he was so funny about it.
He's reliably hilarious, but maybe listeners are not as familiar with John Waters because I haven't actually covered his stuff on this show. Can you give me a little primer? Can you give listeners a little primer on who he is, what makes a John Waters film?
Yeah, so he's kind of, I guess his nickname is the Pope of Filth. He was sort of this transgressive, queer filmmaker that sort of started in like the 70s, very much sort of like New York and East Coast, like counterculture. Big one at the beginning was Pink Flamingos, and then he moved on to a sort of hit, as for him, a more mainstream audience with the film Hairspray, the musical, which starred a young Ricki Lake, and that became kind of a hit, and remade recently with John Travolta in the role, but always had that sort of, even though that film is kind of a bit pop-tastic and in some ways wholesome, like you still see that edge to it. Like it's about race relations. You have a man playing a woman, in the lead role. And then Cry Baby was a big one for me that came up, which was like Johnny Depp in sort of like
1950s.
Sort of weeping greaser. I think you call him a greaser. Yeah, and then Serial Mom, I think, was in kind of the mid-90s, which was him with Kathleen Turner, sort of going a bit, probably the most kind of like horror adjacent that he's done. His work tends to be like quite disturbing, but like not necessarily. This is like the most sort of like someone's a killer like, compared to I think most of them. But yeah, he's just and it's sad because I was reading recently about how him and Aubrey Plaza wanted to make something together, and he's still struggling to get financing despite being like, you know, kind of almost like a beloved
a national treasure
of cinema. Yeah. But you know, he's never really been that interested, I think, in being popular, and that's why he's always been so good.
No, you're right. He's never been interested in being popular, and that's what's made him, I think, so beloved. He has always curiously been so committed to staying in Baltimore. That's where he still lives. I think that's where he has always lived. Serial Mom, alongside Crybaby and Hairspray, are for sure kind of his most commercial films, or at least his more mainstream films. And yet his more mainstream films also have got transgression in their blood. They're just sort of packaged in a more palatable way. But, you know, his early stuff in the 70s with Divine and with his Dreamlanders, that's his kind of ensemble of local weirdos that he was like picking up alongside just an art scene in Baltimore, and then they became friends and longtime collaborators. Some of them are in Serial Mom as well. But yeah, him working with a proper movie star with Kathleen Turner helped like instantly greenlit this film. But even so, there was so much trouble with it. Like, I remember hearing an interview with him about this movie where even after it was fully made, the studio that had financed it kept trying to essentially tank it by saying that it was too violent and too weird and that people would not like this. And then the first test screening went down gangbusters. And then they were like, well, no, but these are just, you know, these are New York people. They like weird shit. Let's take it into the middle of nowhere. And if they like it, then you can release the movie as is. But if they don't, we're going to have to recut it because it's too violent. And he's like, everything was in the script. We just shot the script. They just probably didn't read it once Kathleen was attached.
So bad things have changed so dramatically.
I know.
The studios are like making sure that everything is being released.
Like, completely untouched in the way that the filmmaker intended it to.
Yeah.
I was trying to rack my brains. I believe Serial Mom might have been my first John Waters film. I remember the image of Kathleen Turner coming out of the closet with the scissors and smiling in such an absolutely filthy way and then stabbing someone with the scissors. And I got just such a thrill of rewatching the movie and seeing that all over again. But every single beat of this film is just completely saturated in zingers, in visual gags. Everyone is completely in it for the ride and the bit of the suburban serial killer, true crime obsessed mother who will murder people because they don't recycle things.
God, yeah, but that bitch.
Yeah, she was, though. She was.
That's what's so like clever about him, is that like you do genuinely hate everyone she kills.
You kind of do, right? Especially because they're like, you know, the couple next to her who continuously get cavities and then just gorge themselves on cake and then interrupt her and her husband Sam Waterstone's burning session, which is so wholesome and so delightful.
I love how much Beverly and Eugene want to just shag each other all the long day. Like, such a sweet little detail of just like, yeah, Sam Waterston is just like super hot for Kathleen Turner in this, and as he should be.
I mean, who wouldn't be? So let's talk a little bit about Kathleen. Who was she in her career when she made this film?
So I think this was like, she'd like, you know, been in a big established movie star for a long time, where after kind of Romancing the Stone, where after God, what's the War of the Roses, where after her Oscar nomination for Peggy Sue got married. But like there's still that like slight lack of deduction in like cultural currency because she's now in her 40s, essentially. So it is like, the roles are a little bit like not quite much as there as they were previously, but she is still a name. She still comes with like an element of prestige. But from what I understand, this is also at a time like, Kathleen Turner, poor thing, she's had like autoimmune disease. And like this was also a time where that was really beginning to like massively affect her as well. So she was sort of on a downward trajectory, but she's so good in this role. She's still got the light, and it was, I think, something where she kind of like proved that despite her, because of her autoimmune disease, also because her body was changing and she was looking very different. And of course, we all age, but it was her sort of proving that like beyond being the incredibly gorgeous ingenue that she'd been for ages, she still like had a screen presence at this stage in her life.
And I think it really felt, and I hadn't realized this until reading up a little bit more about it, this was, I guess, the last film that she made before her illness, rheumatoid arthritis, really took a hold of her and kind of not only just changed her appearance because of all the meds as well that she had to be on in order to manage that condition, but also in terms of just how much or how little she was able to do. I was reading things she wrote about it in her memoirs, that it was on the set of Serial Mom that she started experiencing the symptoms really intensely and was diagnosed within a year after the film coming out. But it really made me want to rewatch War of the Roses because she is so unbelievably funny. She's such a physical comedian. Like, she's got that thing where she's obviously stunning and kind of very cheeky about it. Like, she rose to fame as a femme fatale figure, but then very actively turned to comedies in order to avoid being typecast. And I think here she's sort of she's really lampooning both of those. Like, she can do your extreme physical comedy, she can do your action, and she can be really alluring and sexy. And she's wrapping them all up in this really extreme, cheeky kind of performance.
In some ways, that's like a bit of an inane thing to say, but it's just like nobody else could have played this, I don't think.
Absolutely.
And like, it does feel strange that like by the time, like when I was watching Friends, like maybe, probably 6 years later, something like Kathleen Turner was reduced to like woman with deep voice.
Yeah.
And like, that's like the least interesting thing about her. I mean, I do enjoy the way she says pussy willow, but still.
I mean, that scene where she's prank calling her neighbor and yelling obscenities at her, you could just tell that she's giggling. This is not even acting. She's having a giggle.
Hello?
Is this the cocksucker residence?
God damn you, stop calling here.
Isn't this 4215 Pussy Way?
You bitch!
Now let me check the zip code. 212, fuck you!
She really is. And but I mean, it's kind of funny though. It's like woman with like famously distinct voice. Who could it be? I think like John Waters is like very self-conscious, like that's totally. Self-consciously making a joke here, but he's kind of pointing, poking fun at like the idiocy of those that surround her. And like there is this like sense of like, her hiding in plain sight because she's sort of like such a, palatable thing as this kind of blonde mother of two with like, a successful husband in the suburbs, that like who could possibly suspect her of anything when it's just like she's not trying that hard to cover up these crimes, guys.
So what do you make of the film? What do you make of the way that the film satirizes or portrays this suburban Americana?
So ahead of its time, but like I think particularly in like final act where we get into how like titillated people are by like the prospect of her and her crimes, and we've seen that so often happening with true crimes, and also like those who ingest it and those who want it, but also like this idea of like that like secretly there's this like rot in the foundation of like suburbia, and actually the people that are most at risk in all of society are like sensible white women like, whose neighbors might be psychopaths, and then the media frenzy around it all. I feel like John Waters was seeing stuff that people seem to only now be figuring out in 2024.
Well, there's also this, when I get into the true crime stuff, because it is like weirdly prescient about that obsession in the 90s in particular, but arguably even now. But I love how her sense of right and wrong is so specific and yet completely warped. Like, obviously, if you wear white after Labor Day or if you don't recycle, you deserve to be bludgeoned. But
take someone's fucking space, stand up a teenage girl, how dare you? Death.
Exactly. Death by vintage fire poker, specifically. But if you murder people, then that's fine, because they deserve it. Again, it's this like complete and utter self-delusion that she has, but obviously played to a hilarious way as opposed to a sad way, like with Ruth in Prevenge. This is a poster girl for Karen movies before it became a meme and before it became its own. I'm not going to watch it, but before it became its own horror film too.
Or is it a revenge of the Karen's movie? Because I feel like she's mostly killing Karens. But I don't know. Maybe I just like Kathleen Turner too much. I don't know. Like a lot of the sort of women that she attacks are just so like odious. And I suppose technically she's kind of Karen, but I just feel like there's a righteousness to it that's quite relatable. I don't know what to say. Like, I wasn't sad that any of those people died.
Oh, neither was I.
I fully believe it's possible to murder someone for good reasons. That is just something I believe.
The only person that I was sad that she did murder was the juror, played by Patricia Hearst, because honestly, I agree with her. Fashion has changed. A lot. Yeah, and fashion has changed, and white shoes are okay. And those actually were not ugly shoes at all.
No, and actually, I love a pair of white shoes, to be honest. I actually feel like there's nothing more luxurious in ways, because you're sort of like basically suggesting that like, oh, look at this pair of shoes that I've worn that I will wear 3 times. When is Labor Day?
I think in America it's the end of summer. When I think of Labor Day, I think of the 1st of May. We can Google this.
Because I love an autumnal white.
Oh,
I have
yeah. Labor Day is the 1st of May. It's the International Workers' Day. It's
maybe I'm fine with her dying then too. Because yeah, I think a crisp winter white and autumnal white or something. But I think by the time we get to spring, we're going to move into colour.
Flowers for spring, really?
Yeah. Revolutionary.
Tell me then about what do you think of the second part of the movie? So once all the murders are done and it becomes a courtroom drama, what I find really interesting is that, well, there's 2 things. John Waters has personally been a big fan of courtrooms for a long time. He famously attends them. He has corresponded with some, notably like members of the Manson family and other people. He's a big collector of true crime memorabilia and has written quite extensively about this particular fandom of his and about true crime in America. And the film itself was released only months before the O.J. Simpson court case began, which obviously dominated all American culture while it was on. Do you think that the film sort of either satirizes or almost predicts our true crime obsession?
Oh, 100%, particularly with the OJ trial. I mean, like, my favorite line in the whole movie is where I think it's like she says, like, do you think I need a lawyer? And the reply is like, you need an agent.
Yes.
Like, I just think that's like so perfect. But it's funny because it's like, I was talking to this with my daughter earlier where I was trying to explain disco to her, and I was just like, well, you understand that like a lot of kind of like people of color and queer people create culture and then it gets co-opted by like the mainstream. I have no idea why I was telling her this over lunch, but this is what we were discussing. And, like, it's funny hearing you say that about John Waters. Like, that feels like that is, like, an edgy counterculture thing for then. And now feels like kind of, like, popular white TikToker Christian girl or something, like, you know, like that vibe. It's weird how, like, even that sort of, like, that's quite a, like, it's quite an extreme thing to do to kind of, like, absorb yourself into true crime and attend courts and, like, do all of that stuff. But, like, doesn't that feel, like, weirdly not edgy now?
Oh, it is almost, it's almost passé at this point. I mean, you know, there's a lot of ethical questions to it and the Venn diagram between horror and true crime. What I did find really funny about Serial Mom is that Beverly is sort of the absolute nightmare of everyone who is anti-horror movies or anti kind of true crime content, in the sense that it's like, oh, is she just taking notes? Is she taking down? Is she, you know, glorifying these serial murderers? And she is. She's literally pretending to read a book about birds, and actually she's looking through her picture book of Charles Manson and Ted Bundy pictures and looking at them like they're pinups. She has these manuals on murder. Like, she's taking notes like a diligent student. And similarly, her entire family, when she's on trial, are taking advantage as well. They're already selling a book. Someone's written a book before the trial is even over. Suzanne Summers already pops up because she's researching playing Beverly for a movie. Like, everything that could have possibly been sold has been sold, assuming that she's guilty, but also trading on the fact that there's no way someone like her could possibly be guilty of anything, because she's a suburban white mother of two who likes birding and recycles properly.
God. And when you kind of think, I mean, like, it's almost like astonishing to look back on that OJ trial, like, you know, like you said, it's just like a few months later, and think of like the number of books sold. Like, 2 people died. A woman was like near decapitated by her powerful. I say he's dead. He did it. Like, near decapitated by her abusive, powerful husband, and like the thought, even like someone like a Faye Resnick within that trial, who I don't believe to be like a horrible person, and like I can only imagine what going through that would be. But like the idea that you're posing topless on Playboy, selling a book, whilst the trial is still going on. Like, I think John Waters tapped into something that was like, if not, again, I don't want to like blame the woman herself, but like the system was depraved, and that it was just like willing to like milk every dime out of this shit.
And it was, you know, OJ is a great example, because then he did it himself when he published a book that was titled "I Did It," with a very tiny "if I did it." It was a teeny tiny "if" on the cover. But you're right.
It's funny because I think we often think like we're in this like dumbest timeline, and like things kind of went wrong in like when Trump was elected and like, you know, 8 years ago. And it's just like, oh no, things have been real bad for a long time.
Well, I mean,
if I did it, Jesus Christ.
Oh yeah. If you Google the cover, it's actually obscene how playful it's trying to be. John Waters likes trash. He's famously kind of associated with bad taste, but he says very often, and I think it's completely true, you have to have great taste to have like bad taste. In the sense that you need to have like this personality that is appreciative of tackiness or extravagance or extremity in whatever shape that takes. So I think he's not an unthoughtful filmmaker or even like writer or thinker at all. Even though he like collects all of these things and all this memorabilia, he understands its place in culture. And I think the way that he plays on how quickly and how extremely things are monetized in the true crime world is like completely razor sharp. And it continues to be that way. Like, my God, a murder or a kidnapping cannot happen without a 6-part documentary series being released about it within a year of it happening. And sometimes while it's still ongoing. And similarly, one of my favorite scenes is Matthew Lillard, bless him, in one of his very first screen roles.
So hot.
So cute, so adorable. And he's like become the de facto agent of the family of his mom. He gets punched out by the brother of one of his mom's victims. And he immediately goes like, do you have an agent? Because we're thinking of this person to play you in the movie. And that's the only thing that matters.
And I believe that would, if you put that into something that was made in this year, that would almost feel like so obvious it wasn't, like, it wouldn't feel like satire. It's sort of the context of the time that makes this like feel so remarkable. But yes, Matthew Lillard, like, what an absolute, this is a very stacked cast.
It's amazing.
I think Ricky Lake doesn't have like a ton to do, which is surprising given that she's like, you know, like got an established relationship with horses. I think she's pretty bad. But yeah, Lillard, Waterson, Tracy Lords, I'm always happy to see.
Always a welcome appearance in a John Waters movie in particular. But
yeah, I mean, I was. I think I first came to her with Blade.
Yes,
yeah, I think it was a very important figure.
Absolutely. And before we start wrapping up, kind of, what do you think, aside from the very superficial, it's moms that kill, what do you think Serial Mom and Prevenge share in their DNA?
I guess what I kind of like find interesting of them is they sort of like, they speak to a sort of accepted madness of the system that, and then that feeling of like emperor's new clothes where certain things should not be permitted, certain things shouldn't be allowed, and perhaps if you're sort of responding with violence it's because you see things as they truly are. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm suggesting that your listeners go out and start killing people.
I don't think they ever would.
But we should maybe
have very smart, discerning listeners
that would get away with it. I understand.
And I know we've been talking about kind of quite big themes and sometimes really sad ones, but shall we end on a couple of zingers? What were your favorite moments of either one of these films?
Oh, actually, my favorite is when Ricky Lake's character says to her mum, of like, where she's kind of like, kind of relating to Ted Bundy, where she just says like, he killed people, Mom. And she replies like, we all have bad days. And I'm just like, yeah, we do. Some of us just threatened to murder a man on the streets of Amsterdam. You know what? And if he was not the most generic looking man that I had ever seen in my entire life, I would have found him.
You know, my favorite one is when Beverly, to her son, Matthew Lillard, is like, he says something shit. And she's like, Chip, you know how I hate the brown word? I think I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that, the brown word.
Oh my God. That's ridiculous. Oh, you know, another good one is Ricky Lake's character again. Like when she's just like, "Oh no, my mother's a killer," and then she's like, "I'll never get a boyfriend now." Just like, yeah.
I also, this is not even a line of dialogue, it's just a detail. I love that at one point, while they're rifling through, the police, I think, are rifling through Beverly's things, and they find this collection of serial killer stuff, including tapes from Ted Bundy on the week of his execution. I'm like, the detail. And it's John Waters' voice actually being recorded as like doing the Ted Bundy voice, being like, Beverly, so this week I'm gonna get executed. Which is a perfectly normal sentence to say. I
actually really like the like little clips where it goes to the side where it's kind of, you got like suburban moms and they're just watching like daytime TV. There's like this woman who is just like, yeah, I've married a serial killer. I don't judge him. Like those like little things of kind of like that John always gets about like being like of like suburban East Coast living,
yes,
being like Baltimore or something. And just like this shit you watch at like 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and like how absurd it is. And the way that the audience always used to react, yeah. And like, yeah, people are criticizing like horror movies, and it's just like, you all afternoon are watching the most disturbing things I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, pre-Scream sort of criticism of horror movies. Matthew Lillard's character works in a video store. He's always watching horror flicks. But my favorite tidbit that I would definitely not have picked up when I first watched this was how Serial Mom reenacts a scene, arguably the best scene from Straight Jacket, the William Castle, Joan Crawford movie. I spoke about it when I did the Hag series, and it is the most batshit film. If somebody has not seen it, they absolutely need to check it out, because
I haven't seen it.
Oh my god. Okay, so where she's watching black and white. I think he's watching it. So Matthew Lillard's character and his girlfriend are watching a black and white movie where Joan Crawford is carrying an axe, and she's striking someone with an axe. So there's a scene where she's hiding in a closet, and the closet door opens, and this woman screams, and someone strikes her with the axe, and it's someone wearing a mask of Joan Crawford. And then the real Joan Crawford, wearing the exact same dress and the exact same hairdo, comes in, and they essentially wrestle. So it's Joan wrestling with someone who's wearing a Joan Crawford mask. It's incredible. And this film recreates the closet scene.
Right. I'm so glad you've given me a reason to watch Serial Mom again.
It's my favorite thing. I was like, oh, I've watched this movie now. I recognize it. And he delivers it perfectly, because obviously when the closet door opens and Beverly is just there holding her big scissors, smiling demonically, it's perfect. It's the closest thing to a jump scare that we're going to get in a John Waters movie.
Oh, that's so awesome. Okay, I'm really excited to watch it again.
Also, watch Straight Jacket. It's incredible.
Yeah, no, I want to. I will add it to the list. I mean, you've given me some skincare products before the record, and now I've got Straight Jacket. I'm rewatching Serial Mom. Yeah, screw my career. This is like, to hell with you all my Tuesday deadlines. Yeah, this is what I'm going to be doing. It's just always such a gift to be asked on. I end up with all these little treats.
You're very welcome. And before I let you go to rewatch Serial Mom, is there anything you wanted to say about either one of these movies that we haven't had a chance to discuss?
Only that I feel like we lost a lot with the Scream franchise. And revisiting Matthew Lillard, who I had entirely forgotten been in this film, I feel like we need to go back to the sort of slightly unhinged performance that feels very rooted in almost classical character acting that he is so adept at. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, watching it, of the most recent Scream film, which I did not enjoy at all, and thinking about how people end up going into this sort of cartoonish thing. Mm-hmm. And it's not that he's not cartoonish, because he is very extreme. But I think this film made me really appreciate, because it's something that I think Kathleen Turner is doing. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that Matthew, he almost carried the baton into the Scream films. And I don't know that we're getting people capturing that, that sort of character actor extremity as much. So I love you, Matthew Lillard. I love you, Kathleen Turner. But I would like to see whatever kind of passing of the baton of a protege happens next, because, I felt myself watching it and missing him.
I mean, I think about Matthew Lillard often, and I will happily rewatch his entire oeuvre, starting with Serial Mom. Leila, thank you so much for your time. This is always a joy. And can you please tell listeners where they can find more of your work online?
You can, find me. I'm on Twitter at Leila_Latif. I've written a cover feature for the recent issue of Little White Lies, which I think Final Cast listeners, will be very into the new upcoming Zoe Kravitz film, Blink Twice. It kind of, it's our sort of interest. So you can catch me in the newest edition or any issue of Total Film, and I host the Little White Lies podcast. So,
Awesome. Thanks so much.